What's up guys, Vylocity from Pitchfork Academy here, and today I'll show you how to turn your 3D assets into animated 2D sprite sheets for your UI, pickups, and just about anything else. We're using this exact system in our upcoming game Perspectre for our retro style coin counter, but the same technique works great for inventory items, abilities, pickups, currencies, or just about any animated icon you can think of. I'll show you how to build a simple rendering setup where you can drop in any 3D asset, choose your frame count, render a full 360-degree rotation, and create a transparent animated sprite sheet ready to use in your game. After that, we'll create a material to control the animation speed, then use it in a simple HUD widget to display your animated icons anywhere on the screen. Finally, I'll show you how to display the same sprite sheet in the world using a single looping Niagara particle, giving you another way to create a simple retro-style pickup or other animated objects. Now, before we get started, guys, if you don't want to spend time recreating everything from scratch, you can find all of my Unreal Engine tutorial project files over on my Patreon, Vylocity's Vault. You'll get instant access to the materials, VFX, and many other visual setups for my tutorials, so you can jump in, experiment, and see how everything works at your own pace. Check out the link in the description below to learn more. And if you're looking to connect with other Unreal Engine developers, be sure to join our free Pitchfork Academy Discord, where you can ask questions, share your projects, and learn from other developers. You'll find that link in the description below as well. Now let's jump into the tutorial. Alright guys, here we are inside of Unreal Engine 5. I'm using 5.6, but this tutorial should work with any version of Unreal Engine, especially Unreal Engine 5. We will need to enable a plugin called Movie Render Queue, which has been around since even before Unreal Engine 5, so you should be good to go. And we can go ahead and enable that now. So I'll go up to the Edit tab here, and then down to Plugins. Then we can search here for Movie Render, and it should pop right up, Movie Render Queue. We'll just go ahead and enable this and then click Restart Now so it takes effect, and I'll meet you guys back here in a moment. So once you've loaded back up, the Plugins menu might still be up, so I'll just go ahead and close that. And now we want to make a level to contain all of our systems for creating the sprite sheets. So what I'll do is just first create a folder. So I'll right click in the content browser, new folder, and I'll call this icons. You can maybe name it something different. And then inside of here, I'll just right click and make a new level. I'll call this L_icons. And then we can double click to go into this, and it should be a perfectly blank level. Go ahead and click save if it asks you. And now we have nothing in here. So the first thing we can do is add a directional light. So what I like to do is go up to the window tab here, and then there's an environment light mixer. If you click this, there's a bunch of really nice buttons here that will create all the lights that you could possibly want. Now, for this, I'm only going to create the directional light and the skylight. If you add these other things here, you'll start to get an atmosphere and you'll see the blue sky, and then it won't give us the transparent background behind the images. So if you do want the background in your images and you don't care about that, you can do this in any level that you like. But for the purpose of this, to create the PNGs, we want only these two lights here. So I'll go ahead and close out of this now. And we're getting an error here. That's because the skylight is set to real-time capture. So I'll go ahead and check that off. And then we'll come back to the skylight in a moment. But first, let's go ahead and get our camera out. So now we can go up to the little cube with the plus here, and then down to cinematic. And I'll just go ahead and grab a Cine Camera Actor. I'll just click it once. And then in the location here, I'm just going to zero out the location with the little arrow there. And obviously we can't see anything yet because it's totally dark. But let's go ahead and now quickly, I'm going to go to Fab to get a free asset. You can use any character or object, anything that you want for this, but I'm just going to go to Fab and grab a banana mesh. So once this loads here, I'll search here for banana, and then I'll just filter the price by free. And there was a decent one that I liked. Oh, this one here by Toss. I'll just click Add to Project. And now we'll have a mesh to use for our cinematic camera. So I'll just go into the mesh, find it, and then drag it into the world. I'm also going to zero it out. And then here we can see that we have the light working. So I'm just going to drag the banana out a bit further and then click on the camera just to preview how it's looking. So it's still a bit too close and a bit too high. So I'm just going to drag it out a bit further and then down some. We'll see how that looks. That's pretty centered. Now, one thing I like to do is to click on the camera and then change the ratio of the camera. Because right now it's a 16:9 image. So we can go to film back section here and then change this to custom. Oh, it doesn't actually change. Yeah, we have to adjust these. So these just have to be the same number. It doesn't really matter. I just was using 32:32. And now we have a perfectly square image, and I might just bring the banana a little bit closer. Cool. Now what I might do is before we animate the banana, I'm just going to rotate it. So if I click E on the keyboard, you can rotate it a bit like this. And then what we'll be doing is rotating it on the Z like so. So that's looking pretty good. But we're not done yet with the lighting because as you can see, it's very harsh shadows here. So to make our icon have decent shadows and lighting, we can go into the skylight and then change it from source type captured scene to specified cube map. And then there should be a tone here to play around with. I'm just going to choose this desert outer HDRI. And then I'm also going to go down and find the advanced, lower. So under advanced here in the first section, there's lower hemisphere a solid color. I'm just going to uncheck that because I noticed that you'll get some black shadow still if this is on. So lower hemisphere a solid color checked off. Now when we click on our camera, we should see the banana just how we expect. And then there's two more settings on the camera that I want to adjust. So make sure that you have the camera selected. And then let's find the focus settings. And then here you can choose this little eyedropper here and then click on your object. So now the camera will know to focus entirely on this object at that distance from the camera. And then the other option we want to change is motion blur. So if we search for motion, you'll see here there is an amount. We want to change this to 0. Now there's a ton of other options in the post-process settings that you can mess with. And just keep that in mind. If you do want your object to look any different, I would go into the camera and adjust the post-process settings here. Instead of adding a post-process volume, you want to do it in the camera like we did here with the motion blur. The next thing that we want to do is to create a level sequence to be able to rotate the banana and have the camera focus on the banana. So I'll go back to my content browser and into my icons folder that I created. And then I'll right click and go up to level sequence. And I'll name this ls_icons. Now we can go ahead and double click to open this up and it should automatically bring us to the sequencer. It'll create a new tab down here. And now we're working in the sequencer. Now you can add things to it here, but what I like to do is just drag in the Cine Camera actor directly and it will create a track for that. I'll just collapse it. And then I'll also drag in my mesh. So I'll drag in the banana. And then under the banana, you can see we have a transform, and then we have rotation. Now, I'm not going to mess with the roll or the pitch, but the yaw, I'm just going to make sure that's 0. And then we want to now talk about basically how you want to set up your image. So if you want it to be 16 frames, which would be 4 across, 4 down, so you'd have 4 columns, 4 rows, you would want to make the animation 16 frames long. But in this case, I'm going to do an 8x8 sheet, so it's a bit more realistic. It'll look like it has a higher frame rate. But if you want that really retro look, you can definitely do lower amount of frames. Like you could do 4x4, 5x5, 6x6, and then you just multiply those together to get the amount of frames you want. So if you did 6x6, you would drag it to 36 frames. Not this bar, but we can create a key now and I'll show you what I mean. So if I click on this little add a key, new key button here, it will create a keyframe here, and then I just drag it to 64 because I want to do an 8x8 sprite sheet. And then I'll change the yaw to be 360 degrees, and then hit enter, and then click the add a new key right there. Now when I drag this top bar back and forth, we can see that the banana rotates. Now, by default, the rotation does not use linear rotation, so it will kind of slowly speed up to the rotation. So if you do want it to be linear, which I prefer, I will click and drag to highlight both of these keys, and then right click one of them. And you can see here we have the different interpolations. So by default, it's on cubic, which we don't want. I'm going to select linear. So now when we drag the banana, it rotates just how we would expect. Now there's one more thing that we need to make sure that we do on the sequencer, and that is to drag back the other two bars here. So this red one at the top needs to go back to 64 frames, and then this camera cuts track also back to 64. Now everything lines up, and we'll only get 64 images from our image sequence from the movie render queue. All right, so now that everything's lined up, we can quickly test just to make sure our animation looks good. So I'll drag that bar back to the start and click play down here on our level sequence, and it should do one full rotation. That looks great. Now we're good to go ahead and go into the movie render queue. So up at the window tab, we can click that, and then cinematics and movie render queue, as long as you enabled this earlier. We'll click that, and you won't see anything here at the start. But once you click the plus render here, we can select our level sequence, which is ls icons. And then here we can see we have settings and unsaved config. So we want to click that. And then on the left here, you'll see a bunch of different options. So we have JPEG sequence, deferred rendering, and output. We do not want JPEG unless you're doing a actual like background. We want a PNG, so we have a transparent background or an alpha. So I'll just click this and delete it, and then click the setting button here and go down to PNG sequence. There's a ton of other stuff here you can mess with, but we just need the PNG sequence. And make sure that right alpha is on. We want that to be true. And yeah, just quickly, if you go back to the setting tab here, you can see there is a lot of things here that you can experiment with to maybe get an even higher quality image. There's anti-aliasing, console variables you can add if you like. But to be honest, with just the PNG sequence and deferred rendering and the lighting that we set up, we should get a really solid image. So we don't need to do anything on deferred rendering. Now we can go to the output tab. So here we have output directory, which by default, it saves it to your project folder. So it will just be in whatever your project's name is in that folder structure, which I like to keep because it's nice and organized that way. And then file name format, I wouldn't mess with this because the sprite sheet generator that we'll use does like this format and it keeps everything in order. So this setting here is the important one. This is going to be the output resolution of each individual frame that goes into your sprite sheet. And by default, it's pretty big. It's 1920 by 1080, which is a 16:9 ratio. So we definitely don't want that. We want it to be a perfect square. And we also don't want it to be this large. So for example, for this tutorial, I'm doing an 8x8 sprite sheet, so 64 frames. And I want my final sprite sheet to be 2048 by 2048. So what I would want to make the output resolution here is 256 by 256 because 256 goes into 2048 8 times. I hope that makes sense. It'll make more sense when we see the sprite sheet after we render out the images. But just for another tip, if you wanted maybe a really low FPS look with a smaller image, let's say you wanted a 1024 sprite sheet because it's not so big on the screen. And let's say you did 16 frames, so a 4x4 grid. Then you would also just make the output resolution here 256 by 256 because 256 goes into 1024 4 times. So it really is just a balance. You can try different numbers out and see how it looks when you get it into the engine. So I'll leave it at 256 by 256. And we should be good now to accept this. But before we render it out, I want to click on my unsaved config here. Again, bring that back up. And then if we click this drop down, we can save it as a preset, which is really handy so you don't have to set these settings up ever again.
So I'll click save there. And this is called a movie pipeline primary config. So I'll name it mppc underscore icons and just make sure that you're in a folder that you want it. So I got icons selected here, and then I'll click save. So that'll save that. And now we can see here we're on our preset, and now we can accept that again. And now we're good to go ahead and click render local. You don't want to do remote. So I'll just render local, and then it should do a full spin, and it's done. Now we go up to the output and click on this project directory saved movie renders, and it should take us to a folder here that has all of the images in it. And it should be starting at 0 and then ending at 63. That gives us the 64 images. So if we click on the first one and open that up, and if I tap the right arrow key on my keyboard over and over, you can see that now we're rotating through the banana, but it is just a simple 2D image, which is pretty awesome. And eventually it would go all the way around. So I can close out of that now. Then we can go ahead and just minimize our window here with all of our images because we're going to drag them back into the website that we're going to look at next. I'll minimize that. And I'll also just minimize the movie render queue and just make sure we're back in our content and then icons folder here. So this is the website that we'll use for the sprite sheet generation. There will be a link to this down in the description. It's called coot.xyz/spritesheet. And essentially you can just drag your files in here and it will automatically create your sprite sheet and adjust the columns and rows accordingly. So now what we can do is just go back to our movie renders, and we can click one and then do Control A to select all of them and just click and drag them right onto the website. And right away you can see we have our animated sprite sheet. Now, just to keep in mind, this is a very detailed sprite sheet. If you wanted it to be more low FPS looking, you would just want to simply not have as many frames. I did 8x8 rows and columns, which is 64 frames, but you could do 4x4, 5x5, 6x6, and then just adjust the size of your images accordingly. Now that we have this, we can go ahead and right click it and save image as, and then just name it whatever it is. So I'll do T underscore banana underscore sprite sheet. So we'll save that, and then I'll just minimize that. And then I'll browse to my image so it's ready to drag in, and I'll just drag this to my other monitor. Now we can go back to the content browser in our icons folder and just drag in our image. And right away you can see we have it. Now, if it looks black on the background like that, it's okay. It just does that for some reason in the preview, but when you click on it, it should have the transparent background. So that's great. That's exactly what we need. Go ahead and minimize that. So now we have everything we need to go ahead and create our material and put it on the screen. So let's go ahead now and go back to our original level. So I'm just going to find the third person level here, and I'll just go ahead and save everything so we don't lose it. And now we can go back to our icons folder, and now we can right click and create a new material. And I'll call this M underscore icons. And then we can double click to open that up and make it full screen. And since we're going to be making this for a widget, we do need the material domain to switch from surface to user interface. And then we'll change the blend mode from opaque to translucent. You could also do mask, but I found that translucent makes the edges a little bit more smooth. But you can definitely experiment with doing masked and then using opacity mask instead of opacity. But I'll just switch it back to translucent. And then we can go ahead and right click and search for texture sample parameter 2D. And we'll call this icon or sprite sheet. And then we can go ahead and click on our banana sprite sheet that we made. And just make sure that it's selected in your content browser so it has this blue highlight. And then go back to our material, select our texture, and then use selected asset from content browser, and it will just pop that right in. And then what we can do is just off of RGB, we'll do a multiply. So we can add a control for our color, and then we'll hold V on our keyboard and click for a vector parameter, and we'll just name this color. And then we can wire this in, and we'll double click the color to set it to fully white. So by default, there's no change. It will always look like your original texture, but if you wanted to tint it for whatever reason, you can use this parameter to do that. We'll wire that into the final color, and then from the A on our texture, which is our alpha, we'll wire that into opacity. Might just drag the color up here. And then we need to right click and search for flipbook. And we'll get this first one here. And the UVs will go into our icon texture. And as you can see right away, it's doing something, but it's using the incorrect number of rows. So for example, here it's saying 2 rows, 2 columns. So that's why we're seeing a bunch more of the banana. So what we can do first is right click on number of rows, promote to parameter. And I'm not going to do columns because in my opinion, the sprite sheet should always be the same rows and columns number. So I'll just wire this into columns as well. And default will set to be 8. And boom, right away we have our animated banana, which is pretty awesome. Now, to control the speed of this, we can do some simple logic. If we right click and search for time, and then drag off of time and click M to get a multiply, and then hold S on our keyboard and click for a scalar parameter. We'll call this speed, and let's set the default speed to 0.5 and wire this into the multiply. And then from the multiply, we'll get a frac node, F-R-A-C. And if you hold Control and Alt on any of these nodes, you can see what it does. So this only outputs the decimal values, which is good because we're working with time. We don't want it to go above 1. So we'll then wire this into animation phase. And now the banana is rotating twice as slow. And of course, if we change this to be like 0.2 or 0.1, you'll see it goes much slower, but you start to see the individual frames a lot more. But again, depending on what you're going for, it could be fine for you. Obviously, 2 is going to speed it up. I think 0.5 is a good default value. So now that we have this, we can go ahead and save that. And I'll just close out of that there. Now, what I'll do is right click on the M icons and create a material instance just so we can name it mi_icons banana. And then if we double click to open this up, now we have those controls to mess with the banana icon individually. So again, if you wanted to tint it for whatever reason, you could do that, or change the speed or whatever, but I'm just going to leave it all as is and then save that, close out. Now you might be wondering, well, how do we get this on our screen or use it? Well, we would need a HUD or a widget. So I would create it in here, but the HUD you might already have created. So you would do this in your own HUD blueprint or your widget blueprint. But what I'll do is go back to my content browser and make a new folder, and I'll call this widgets. So then inside of widgets, we can create our HUD. So I'll right click, user interface, and widget blueprint, select user widget, and I'll call this WBP_HUD. And inside of here, actually, we won't go into this yet. Let's first create our actual icon widget. So let's create another widget blueprint, user widget, WBP_icon. And then we'll double click to open this one up. And the first thing that we want to do is go up to the top here and select fill screen and change this to desired on screen. Then we can search on the left here for size box and drag this right onto our WBP icon, and then click the size box. And this is where you decide how big this widget should be on your screen. So we can do a width and height override, and I might do something like 512 by 512. And now we have this perfect box here. Next, we want to search for an image here and just drag this onto the size box so it becomes a child of the size box. And then here we can go to the brush and search here for our banana. And we want the MI icons banana. So right away we have our spinning banana. And this is where you can kind of also just double check to see Is it too high? Is it not big enough? You can go back and re-render your images until it looks good to you, but I think it looks fine. So we can go ahead and compile that and save it and then close out. Now that we have our widget blueprint for the icon, we can go back into our HUD and we'll create that now. So this is going to be a very basic HUD. There's a ton of tutorials on our channel about creating, different HUDs and things like that. So I'm just going to search for canvas panel, drag this onto the hierarchy here, and we're good with that. And now we can search for our WBP icon. So any widgets that you've created will show up here to add to other widgets. So we're going to drag this into our canvas panel. And then if we select our WBP icon, on the right here, we have size to content. And right away we have it. Now this is actually way too large. So what I'll do is just compile and save it and dock this next to my level. Let's go back into our icon here and select the size box. And let's try 128 by 128. Save that. Now, if we go back to our HUD, you can see now it's a better size. Maybe that's too small. I'll just go ahead and double that, 256 by 256. Compile, back to our HUD. And now we have this here. Now, if you wanted it maybe at the top right, you could drag it over there and then click the anchors and just select the top right anchor like that. Compile, save. And now we have our HUD created. This is ready to be added to our character. So we can just do that really quickly. Let's go to the content browser and find our character. And then wherever you have your begin play logic, you want to do it on there, but I'm going to have to create that because I don't have it yet. Event begin play. Now you could also potentially do this in your player controller. There's different ways you can set up how to add HUD to your character, but this will do for the tutorial. From here, we want to create widget, and then we'll select from the dropdown our WBP HUD. And then from the return value, you can either promote it to a variable so you can mess with it later, but for the sake of the tutorial, I'll just go ahead and add it to the viewport. So search add to viewport. And then we can go ahead and compile that and save and go back to our level. And now if we click play, you can see in the top right, we have our rotating banana. And then we can go full screen. And it looks pretty awesome. Now, of course, this is just one example of how you can use sprite sheets in your game for widgets on your HUD, but you could also place it in the world. So you could potentially use it as maybe a pickup or something like that. So I'll really quickly show an example of how to set that up. So I'll go back to the content browser and find our icons folder. So what we're going to do to create the in-world version of this icon is to create a single looping Niagara particle. So what we can do is right click and go up to Niagara system and then just search at the top for single and you'll see single looping particle. Go ahead and click that and click create. And I'll name that ns underscore icon underscore banana. And then before we open this up, we need a material to pop into there. So what I'll do is just right click on the M icons master material and duplicate it. And I'll just call this M icons underscore Niagara. And then we can double click to open this up. We just need to change a couple settings. So this is currently set up to be used with UI or user interface. So we can just change the material domain to surface. And then we'll change the blend mode to masked and then shading model to unlit. Now you can experiment with these two here, but I think this gives the best result. And then at the top here, we can set the preview mesh to a plane. Now we can see our material. Now we still need to change the opacity mode. So if you hold Control and click and drag from the opacity pin, you can rewire it down into opacity mask. And now as you see, we can have this nice rotating image just like we had on our other material. The last thing we need to do is in the details panel, search for Niagara and check used with Niagara sprites. So check that and save. And then we can go back to our content browser. And then I'll right click on this material. And just like we did before, we'll create a material instance for the banana. So I'll put banana at the end, and then I'll put an I after M. So we know it's a material instance. We'll save that. And now we can go into our Niagara system, NS icon banana. And as you see, we have just a single particle. So that's good. We're going to now click on our module here, and then down in Sprite Renderer, we'll change the material to our MI icons Niagara banana. And as you can see, it's really small, but we have our banana. So we can change the size here. If we go to initialize particle, we'll change it to something like 75. And that should be good. We can save that and go back to our level. And now when we drag this into the world, we have a banana that is just in the world. Now, if I drag this up, it should move, but sometimes there we go. Sometimes it takes a second. And that's pretty awesome. Now we have an in-world version of the animated sprite. So you could use this for a pickup or a collectible or really anything that you want if you wanted a more retro look for your game. And as you can see, no matter where we put the camera, it sort of just always orientates towards it. Now, you may or may not like this effect, but it's there if you want to experiment with it and use it for your game. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Now, if you do end up making anything cool from this tutorial, go ahead and hop into our free Discord, the Pitchfork Academy, if you aren't already in there, and drop some examples in our open showcase. I'd love to take a look at what cool stuff you guys are creating. This has been Vylocity with Pitchfork Academy, and I'll see you in the next one.